Here we go. Hi, everyone. Very excited to have you for this Tarot Office Hours, the last one of 2023. And today we're finishing the year with a bang. We're having our wonderful friend James Ferrara doing his third installment of Tarot Talk Show, which is a series that we're blessed to have every couple of months and hopefully more in 2024. I'm super excited. I will let him introduce Chris, his guest, and we're very excited to have him here as well. And I'm just excited to see all of you for the last time for the end of this year. I hope everyone is okay. And then please give a warm welcome to James and Chris. I'm going to go in the back and let them
Thank you, Letty. Thanks everybody for joining today. I'm presuming that most of you have some familiarity with Welkin Tarot or Chris Leech's work. Chris is the creator of his latest deck, the Odyssean Tarot, but has also created a number of other decks at the intersection of pop culture and the Western mysteries and the tarot, and what I have come to learn through Chris's decks that are scratch the surface in terms of the artwork, and then there's a lot deeper meaning to it. Chris, when did you start doing tarot? When did you start Welkin?
I believe it was 2017, maybe 2016,
And the Odyssean is your 12th tarot deck, is that correct?
If you say so. No, I think it is. It's right in there. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
And so Chris has created, among others, the Shakespeare Tarot, the Charles Dickens Tarot, the Star Trek Tarot, the Gnostic Tarot, the Beatles Tarot, the New Wave Tarot. Is that right?
Yes.
The Dylan Tarot. What else am I leaving out?
Well, there's a Hitchcock. I forget myself.
The Hitchcock, right. The Hitchcock, the golden age of Hollywood. I'm cheating now. I'm looking at the back of the book.
Right.
The Elvis Tarot, the Monty Python,
that's right.
And the Silly Tarot, and the Beatles Lenormand.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So
it's handy having
12,
reference.
12 and a half.
So the way that we do this at Tarot Talk Show, if you've not been here before, if you have been, you know what we do. But I have an idea of some of the things that I'd like to ask Chris, but I let the cards determine the order of the questions and the approach of the questions, and sometimes the questions themselves. So I'm going to start right now. I've been shuffling this deck for a while. I'm going to be using the Odyssean Tarot today. And I've been shuffling it for a while, and I'm going to pull the first card. Appropriately is the Magician.
Hermes, yes.
Yeah. So when I look at this card and I think about what this card traditionally represents, and who Hermes is in terms of a messenger, I think in the context of today and talking to you, I think a lot about you in this card, because this deck wouldn't exist without you. And I'm curious to know why you decided to do a Greek mythology deck, and what your inspiration for creating this deck was.
Well, I have always been interested in Greek mythology of different stripes, but certainly Greek mythology as a boy, and I've always, yeah, it's all, you know how it is. It's always kind of in the background. It's in so much literature and in artwork, and certainly when I was in Europe, I saw it and felt it much more. But I don't know. I mean, I'd done, as you mentioned, I'd done so many of these more cultural, you know, writers or musicians or pop culture things. I kind of wanted to do something more serious, I suppose you could say, and I just felt it was time, you know. But
I mean, you have done serious work. Your Gnostic Tarot
yes, sure,
is a powerful Jungian
yes,
deck that was a collaboration with a friend who was the artist.
right,
And I mean, I think when you tackle Dickens or Shakespeare
sure.
and maybe even Hitchcock,
Mhm,
you're dealing with serious material. But this, I mean, this goes back to the beginning of Western civilization
mhm,
here. And you've spent some time in Greece as well, right?
yes, yeah, off and on. Mhm. Lived there.
Um,
Yeah.
is there so? Is there? I'm just thinking again of the messenger and the creator and magician, and drawing down from above
Mhm.
into this realm, manifesting something like this deck. So how creatively, when you decided to do this deck, how creatively did you approach it? What's the first thing that you do when you decide, hey, I'm going to do a Greek mythological tarot deck?
Well, I mean, I have a number of ideas that are often just percolating in the background, and sometimes I actively pursue them, and they may or may not manifest, and sometimes things just kind of seem to want to be made, or if things happen such that I go down that road. But with this deck, as I said, these idea, yeah, the ideas of uh, inherent in the myths themselves, different stories, they pop up through one's life, and not one. I can't think of one particular incident that caused me to pursue this deck third. Although there is some connection with the Gnostic deck and the painter, because that
Mm.
Greek myths were something we shared in general, and I spent time there in Greece with him, and so um, there's a connection there. But as for as for how I approach a deck, I do a lot of research, you know, uh, and sometimes I do research and it doesn't pan out, or I change gears, you know. But with this, I did the research, and then I start to formulate how it would fit in with the framework of the tarot, if it will, you know, is also crucial. Because sometimes things don't, or I haven't found the way they can. So I didn't find this that difficult in that way. So I just carried on, and yeah, things fell into place. So study. Yeah, and there's always a balance between the history and the stories themselves, like with regard to, in this case, myths, you know, recounting the myths in the, let's say, in the book and in the depiction of the artwork. And then the framework and the structure of the tarot, making that jive, but also the interpretation, you know, what do the myths mean? What do they signify? How can they be relevant to us moderns, you know, in this day and age, into each kind of in different scenarios. And that's and how has it been the case throughout history? You know, so all these things kind of come into play. And I find them interesting, so I just pursue them. But I don't know. There's a fair amount of interpretation then involved, and that sort of ties in with Hermes, because there is a kind of a personal connection with something greater, and that can be in the terms of something divine, or it can be in terms of just human history and yeah, human psychology, human story.
And with all of the research that you do and determining which myths and where they fit in terms of the tarot correspondences and the various archetypes, with that as your foundation, how does the physical part of creating that, the images, the artwork, how does that work for you? So it sounds like you do the foundational work first,
right?
And then do you move into the composition? With these, I know you do, you're an artist in your own right in terms of painting and drawing. Do you sketch these out and then lay the ground? Does that lay the groundwork for the collage work that you do? And just, if you don't mind kind of walking us through that process.
Sure. Yeah, so I always start with the structure. To me, that's the most important.
Hang on just a second. Can everybody mute yourself, please? We're getting somebody's background music coming through. Thanks. Go ahead, Chris.
I always start with the structure. I find that's the most important. Without that, you know, it's a foundation. You can't build on it without it. So, but once that's done, at what point I start to write, and what point I start to draw, create, paint, whatever it is, collage, that's up in the air, because it's kind of it's just something I do by intuition, or how I feel. But so it changes. But and also what happens, of course, is that you're doing both. It kind of reminds me of with music, what if you're doing traditional modern music, what comes first, the lyrics or the music? Well, sometimes it's one, but sometimes it's the other, and often it's a combination. So when I'm thinking about the structure, working on the structure, and then if I pursue writing, I'm still thinking about the visuals. And conversely, if I'm doing the visuals, I'm thinking about the writing, the story, the narrative, the meaning. So it's a kind of a juggle. But with this deck, I intentionally made it what I would call more appealing or approachable for people, attractive. A lot of my own sort of penchant that way is to be a little more rough or expressionistic or dense, So, but with this deck, so when thinking about this deck visually, I was thinking about, what are the images we have of Greek myth outside of things like Jason and the Argonauts, or films from the 70s. A lot of them are, to my mind anyhow, I was thinking of Greek sculpture, and I was thinking, those are older, black and white, they're gray and black and white, and they're distancing. It's a little bit hard to relate to, and I was trying to make it much more approachable and appealing for modern viewers. And so I was trying to, I sort of thought that I wasn't sure how popular Greek myth would be for people. I actually sort of thought it wouldn't really be that popular. I thought it was a kind of an arcane thing of, so I wanted to sort of juice it up a bit. So I sort of was thinking about 19th century nursery books and books for children that were sort of, those kind of illustrative, colorful, but sometimes dark at times, images that were clear, but also, they had an immediacy that were kind of romantic and alluring, but they were also quite distinctive. And so that's how I was thinking of going with that's what started the way the deck. So the deck followed along that way, and I think it became what it became. But that was the origin, the nascence of it. So, and I spent when I work on a deck, I sort of work full time on it. I don't have a job per se, so I spend many hours a day, like 10 easily, working on a deck. So that can be writing, that can be painting, or illustrating, or collaging. So with just to get back to your question on a technical level, all the cards began with ideas, and I sketched them out, and I didn't find it too hard to come up with ideas, because they're kind of there in the stories very often. Sometimes there's details and you don't know what to show or what not to show, but I wanted to keep it fairly simple, so I didn't jam the cards with too much detail, as on maybe some other decks I've done. But so they would start with a sketch, and once I felt pretty good about it, then I would move on to simple line, inking it out with ink, and painting it in. Sometimes to greater or lesser degree, mostly just developing a palette. So, you know, these are the kind of colors we're gonna show if there's an emphasis on one color, or, you know, what the palette is. And those I scanned ultimately, because they weren't huge, not really big. And then once in the computer, with the other decks, I've developed a fairly involved collage technique, where I bring in a lot of different imagery from other artwork, but also from textures and paint itself, like from watercolors to oil. And I just layer. It's all done in layers in Photoshop. And I sort of
and in this deck, I mean, you talk about how you bring so much, so many other elements of the collage work into it. And while you're talking and I'm shuffling, I got a jumper. I pulled Midas, which I think is interesting because I feel like you hold this work very close to your breast. You know, you hold the physical process, all of this very close to yourself, and it's difficult for you to share it other than in the work itself when it's finished. But I'm wondering, as you're talking about this in the context of the work and the collage work for this deck, did you also hold that those collage elements back? Is that what you're sort of getting at, is that there's less collage pieces involved in this? It's less composed than it was before with various elements?
I'm not entirely sure what you're asking, but one thing is a number of the other decks, most of them, I would wager, didn't begin with sketches or strictly speaking a work that I created. They were more solely collage, so that they were all constructed, you know, every card in those decks were constructed in a collage fashion. You know, there was none of the preparatory physical aspects that I described.
And is some of that work incorporated into the cards here, like some of your painting or some of your line work at all in any of the cards?
Yes, in these ones, usually in the more simpler illustrative ones, you know, in the more complex ones that are more like a painting, then I'm using paintings, for instance, classic master paintings, and that kind of thing, illustrations as well. Sometimes even there's not really any photographs, I don't think, unless maybe like sometimes with those coins and things like that, objects, a cup, maybe it may be a kind of it may be a photograph that I've doctored, you know, but by and large, it's paintings and mostly illustrations. So there is remnants of, and there's certainly the line structures from my original drawings, and and that's different than a lot of the decks in the past, which was again solely collage. I'm pulling a lot of stones in
today, it seems like. I don't know why. But we're
This is again
for
a
this
kind of
process,
creative card.
yeah.
Yeah.
Was this a collaborative process for you? Did you work with other people when you were doing this deck?
No, but it was a, oh, well, visually, no. And the writing of it, initially, no. But I was aided by Michaeline, who helped copy edit. She did a wonderful job copy editing the work. There's lots of mistakes needed fixing, a lot of gaffes, but otherwise, no. Otherwise, it was solely me. I mean, you know, at the same time, a lot of aspects of the images are collage, so I'm working with other people, whether they know it or not. You know what I mean? But no. So
and how does Daedalus, the myth of Daedalus, fit for this card, for the Three of Stones, which corresponds to the suit of Pentacles?
well, as we know in the Rider Waite, we have the workman working in what appears to be a church, I believe, right? Cathedral. And there's a kind of, I forget the figures in the back. Is it a burgher in a some kind of clergy? He, you know, Daedalus was the master constructor of that time, and he constructed many things, from the labyrinth to the wings to escape, as is kind of displayed on that card with Icarus. Often, though, there was a double side to his creations, right? They were either used for nefarious, I don't know, but sort of darker purposes, or they, you know, some kind of entrapment, or, you know, some kind of cage of some kind, or this idea of freedom. It's inherent. It was there. They did escape, but there was a demand for a kind of moderation, which his son did not heed. He was carried away with the kind of the possibilities in that freedom, which is maybe a comment on the nature of creativity. But
do you feel, because mythology is there's so much allegory in mythology, do you feel that there are warnings or lessons beyond just educating people about the different myths inherent in the cards that you designed?
do I feel that there's meanings beyond
That there are lessons or warnings? I mean, as you talk about why am I blanking on his name? With his wings that flew too close to the sun, Icarus. You talk about that in the context of this card, and typically when I look at this card, I see you know, working together, camaraderie in the workplace,
right,
coming together to three minds that come together to make a whole better than any one person could. Not a warning of you know, flying too close to the sun.
Sure.
But do you see that and I mean, I guess, you know, if we're looking at the card this way, then that could be an interpretation. But so I guess my question was, do you see that sort of allegorical lesson in the cards, in the myths that you chose throughout the deck?
Yes, I do. I mean, of course, the mythology is highly allegorical. I mean, there's all kinds of ways of looking at myths, and people argue about what they're doing, what they're all about. But allegory is, of course, is one of the obvious things. And I'm always, I, I, I'm a big fan of allegory, and I think allegorically. So. Um, with regard to, in some ways, what you're talking about, so I think that the myths are often talking about lessons or conveying information or meaning, and perhaps everything is, but I think that they do it more so. They do it in layers, so that there's ways to interpret. You can look at it from different angles, through different lenses, even within the same myth. And even the fact that many of the myths aren't concrete, there's multiple versions of them. It just adds to that. But in some ways, what you're talking about, it seems, is the idea of reversals a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always felt that reversals is one way to look at the cards and to interpret the cards and to work with the dual nature of the cards. But I've always felt that the cards do have a dual nature, and so that the reversals are integral and they're baked in. So as with many of the myths, there's the different ways to interpret it. It can be a warning. It can be a positive thing. It can be an escape. But it's also a warning. Very often in myth, you have the idea of hubris, so that human beings often have some skill or are blessed in some way, or have some ability, but it goes too far. They don't moderate it, and they become a victim of it in some curious manner, or the gods themselves, teach them a lesson about not being moderate or not being thankful for the blessing, or not properly keeping their place, So, yeah, that's a recurring theme, it seems to me. And
I'm gonna cheat a little bit,
okay,
because you were talking about reversals, and this is your Hanged Man card. I am really intrigued by, and I keep going back to it for a variety of reasons. So, in the context of the reversals and the lessons, and this is Dionysus. Can you talk a little bit about this card? That I think it's so interesting, because as the card is presented, along with the other majors, the number of the card is at the top here, but the number is reversed and the character is hanging upright. And it's not until we turn the card in the reverse of the order of the rest of the deck that we see the character hanging upside down. And also that we have this vine, I guess, that transcends the borders of the card. So can you talk a little bit about this card and reversals and what this means for you?
Sure. Yeah, it's it's a fairly complicated card. I mean, it's Dionysus, so it's going to be complicated, kind of. It has a complicated history. In the deck, it ties in with the Judgment card and the cults which he's associated with. So I'm having a bit of fun here with the idea of reversals, upside down, and which way is up, and so the card itself is fairly simple, like, you know what I mean, graphically, imagistically, it's pretty simple. But the card is fairly complex with regards to the god's history, and it, because he's a curious god in a number of ways. Being the way he was brought up, sort of, but also his placement in the pantheon. He was an older god from an earlier time, and he was sort of shunted, away, and he reappeared at the end. So he was both an early god and then became one of the last of the Greek gods. That's itself a kind of reversal or an upside down placement. Yes, there's a lot of, there's so much to say in some ways, but the Hangman card, of course, itself is a curious card, I find.
In what way for you?
I guess it's sometimes hard to define it, or it plays a different role at different times, is maybe what I might say. But we're right on the cusp of the death card, right, is one thing. And Dionysus in some ways predicts Christianity. There's a movement there toward Christianity, and he is a reborn God himself. He's almost a kind of precursor to Christ. But yeah, and he, there's often an idea this person is trapped and strung, but he manages a way out. So we see that in his own rebirth within the pantheon, but we also see it as the rebirth through Christ, as a different sort of dispensation, religiously speaking. But he himself, within his tradition, within the Maenads and his followers, with the Bacchanalia and this sort of idea of excess and letting out this feeling of being trapped, like too much of a kind of a logical and male or deterministic attitude. Dionysus presents a kind of alternative, which is a breaking out of that, or through it, or under, pulling a carpet out from under, or a kind of a return to an animal state in some ways, as a way of getting through a kind of impasse. And the cult itself, and Dionysus in many of the stories, was seen as a kind of he was viewed with a kind of terror, because he was a kind of a threatening. He was an unknown. He was a sort of chaotic element. Yeah.
I think it's one of the things that's interesting so far. Let's see, I want to pull one more card and then let people ask some questions. But one of the things that I really like about this deck as a guy is that there's a really nice balance of feminine and masculine energy in this deck. And a lot of times, I think it's very common in tarot and oracle and in our world to find a lot of feminine forward decks, which is great. I have many of them, but it's, as a guy, sometimes I'm looking for, you know, something that I can relate to from the positive masculine energy, and I feel like this is a nice balance of that. But sometimes the masculine decks that I've looked at, then they're too far to the other end of the spectrum. So, but so far today I've been pulling masculine cards, which has been interesting. Now, for the last card, I love the fives, right? We always love the fives. The fives are such a great scream, it feels like. And here we have the five of flame, which corresponds to wands. And I see this card as conflict. Did you struggle? Like, what were your struggles in making this deck and bringing this deck to manifest in reality?
I'm trying to think. You know, I'm tempted to say I didn't have very many struggles. Nothing comes to mind. Nothing leaps to mind as a real an impediment or conflict or yeah, things went pretty smoothly. They from the inception and from the creating the imagery, and then from the working, and then on the text, and then my connection with it was natural, and then meeting Michaeline and her help with the deck, and then the success of the Kickstarter campaign. I haven't had.
You know, it's funny as you're talking, and I'm, you know, sometimes when I'm reading and a card doesn't make a lot of sense in what I think of as its traditional place and what it has to say, then I just go with my gut and the imagery. And in this deck, I see, you know, I kind of see you as the boar. You know, all of this really great, strong, wild energy, moving swiftly with the chaos behind you.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know you well, Chris, but I know you a little bit, and that seems to kind of capture, and you know, how I see you in some ways, you know.
Well, it's true. I do try to, escape from the throng in the fray. Yes, I do try to stay. Yes, but I mean, with regard to the balance of male and female, I was just thinking as looking. I mean, this has female figures in it. Atalanta, of course, is part of the point of this in this male suit. Yeah, but getting back to that, I always do try to have a balance, and it can be difficult. But I think it's integral to the tarot that there is that balance of male and female energies. But But so I see that a little bit reflected in that melee behind there, headed by
Yeah.
but I appreciate that. I mean, that's that's sort of funny that I'm the boar. I wouldn't argue, but
and it's a handsome boar. I mean, it's not like some,
right.
you know, it's not like
He's not too snaggled to anything. Yeah.
Yeah. And you talk about this one last question sort of related to this card too. You talk about the success of the Kickstarter campaign, and I know that kind of took you by surprise. In a
Right.
way, I see that also as, you know, fleeing that kind of clamor for your work. You know, you've done the work, you've put it out there, and now you want to get away and let everybody else,
Right. Yes.
you know, find their way through it.
Yeah, that's very true. That's my nature, and so I can see that. Yes, it was a little startling or unexpected, certainly, the success of the deck, and a little, you know, also a little unsettling.
In what way?
Well, just because I don't like too much attention. You know, I don't. I find it difficult, but
You value your privacy.
yes, yes, and I'm just not good at navigating my own anxieties and notions of public discourse. Yes.
The more we talk and the more I look at this card, the more I just see you in it. And I love that. I think it's a really powerful and positive statement in a way that I don't normally look at for the fives.
No.
I want to open up to questions if anybody has any questions for Chris. You can either just jump in and unmute yourself and ask, or you can raise your hand.
No questions.
That suits you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nobody? Oh, here we have a question in the chat. Michaeline is asking, could you talk about your non-traditional approach to the court cards? In the Odyssean, pages equal mortal, knights equal demons, kings equal deities, and the queens each have their own epithet.
Right. Well, that certainly sums it up. I guess I wouldn't want to say this too loudly, but I have some problems with the court cards, and I often find them tiresome and somewhat extraneous. But it all depends on, you know, how people view them, and also as I've kind of continued to discover by making decks, they can be infused with more than perhaps meets the eye, or at least that I perceive is inherent in traditional tarot decks. So I often try to add a few tricks or go a little sideways with them.
With the court cards?
Yes, to make them more interesting to myself and hopefully other people, to make them somehow maybe more relevant, or just to expand the possibilities. So yeah, as Michaeline says, they do have these kind of you know, categories, and they have a structure that I've devised for them in this deck. Yeah, I guess I thought it was somewhat important to maybe consider, you know, with the traditional allocations, you have things like, you know, knights and kings and queens, which is somewhat germane to ancient Greece, of course, but it's not really, and it's also not really solely relevant to the myths. And so I thought I'd sort of split up some of the areas of the myths a little bit with an eye to categories. So human beings and gods and chthonic creatures, which is of course an important part of myth, and then the queens, a queen figure. So, but the queens I found, in other words, the females very often took on different kind of aspects, and some of that is probably a large part of that has to do with the role of women at the time, sociologically, within ancient Greece, and projected onto different figures from that. Right. So
I'm just showing the queens is Michaeline
yes,
has called them out in
right.
the
Right, that's Antigone.
in the chat.
Right. And so it was actually a little bit of a struggle, and Michaeline actually helped me with this. We were thinking about how to. There seemed to be no way to properly, adequately categorize what would be, the erstwhile queens under one nomenclature, under one moniker, under one understanding. So I chose in the end just to have a kind of variety, a kind of panoply of female figures. So, and I thought that actually it kind of makes sense. It sort of talks about feminine, female energy in some ways. So,
And power.
Sure. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Do you, if anybody else has any questions, please just jump in or raise your hand or put it in the chat. But I'm curious, do you have a favorite card in the deck, or are there a couple of cards that just you really love for whatever reason?
Drawing a blank. It'd probably be easier for me to talk about cards I dislike. But
well, let me ask you that next.
It's funny, nothing is coming to mind, but because what often happens is that this is Circe, of course. What happens is I think about the characters, so I think about Circe, and she's an interesting character to me. I think about Medea, who is an interesting character to me. I think about Medusa, who's an interesting character, because of, not always because of who they are, but because of what they have come to represent, because of what it seems that they signify in the story. It seems like with Medusa, for instance, Athena seems to be up to something with that with her whole story, and so that's what pops to my mind, which maybe in some ways talks about how I often view my decks, and that is, it's not to say that the visual isn't important, but maybe because I do so much research and I think about the backstory and the background of the cards, I'm much more apt to think about those aspects when I think about a card. To me, the visual is important, of course, but it's also one view, one moment, one aspect, one picture, obviously, of a bigger story. And so I often try to think about the story as opposed to the image.
I
which
think
is
that
somewhat,
that's probably one of the reasons that
right.
every one of your decks comes with an incredibly well researched and presented reference on the deck.
Right.
I want to get to a question. Samantha has her hand up. Samantha, you want to ask a question?
I'm curious about. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
It was a story that I did. I ended up going down, finding out about Medusa, and
Yes.
there's the most common myth, which is the Roman one, where she's cursed by Athena,
Hmm.
etc., etc. But then I
Right.
found that there's a Greek myth, which is actually quite different, and it wasn't Athena who cursed her, and it was. So my question is because with the Greek myths, and obviously it depends on who's written them, where your research takes you, and things like that. But I found that the characters, they have different aspects to them, and they have different stories. So I'm curious about how you decide which aspect of the story or the character,
Right.
how do you make your choices with that? I
Right.
was just curious about your process.
Well, as you say, there are a great many variations on the stories, and of course the Romans, just that whole aspect where the Romans adopted and modified and incorporated stories and figures is its own thing. I'll just maybe mention that in general, I wanted to keep it Greek-based deck. But sometimes I had to fudge it a little. But how I decided, well, I mean, my first of all, this deck is not exhaustive. It's not as though I tracked down every possible version of every myth out there, and by any means. But I guess it's an arbitrary, it's a personal choice. I tried to stick with. For one thing, I did include some variants. Like I did mention some variants, right? In some stories this happens, in some stories this. But in general, because that can get kind of confusing, or make it difficult for people reading or with the cards, I tried to stay with more or less one version or one general idea. And what I used to decide was my own personal connection, I guess I would say, or my understanding. If I felt that the story that I had chosen to fit with this card, with the tarot card, with the tarot structure, I stuck with, the two jived, and so that would be the story that I would go with. And that speaks of if the story myth had meaning for me, if I could understand, find a way to understand it. And it felt rich, and it felt relevant to the tarot, the specific tarot card allocation. So that's basically how. And that's of course just through a process of, aside from years of reading, and gleaning information here and there, that's the result of just study that I did in preparation. So I hope that answers your question, but
No, I admire you because I know, I mean, I just did Medusa and I know how long that took me.
Right.
So if you're doing, I'm just thinking
Did-
78 cards.
Well,
78 of
okay.
them.
Okay, well, what did you find out about Medusa? What was the alternate story that you had there?
That
What
was
kind of-
interesting. Athena was, with the Greek myth, Athena was originally, one, she was a domestic goddess,
Mhm.
which I found quite fascinating. And that's why she's associated with weaving.
Right.
She became this, like, warrior stroke justice stroke,
Mhm.
did a complete change.
Right.
And how the Greeks viewed Athena was quite, like the Greek culture and how they worshipped her was very much that domestic goddess, and how she changed and she took that role on, almost like she'd flipped from being very feminine to becoming masculine.
Right.
Right. Yeah. But
Yeah,
she's
she features twice in the deck as a specific card because she is very important, it seems. And as you say, she does have these aspects, like Pallas and Athena and
yes, Palace as well. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then just that, there's the Gorgons, which were a group of beings
Mhm.
already, and that Medusa was one of three sisters.
Mhm.
And in some of the myths, she's not always turned into a Gorgon, because she starts off as a Gorgon.
Right.
And those are the things that I was finding out.
Yeah, well, this is it. Yeah. She starts off where she's her human, and how is it how are they sisters if one of them's human? It it doesn't quite yeah, it's not logical in that sense, no. Although
Thanks for asking that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna make a bad joke, but
You can make a bad joke.
no, too late.
Sorry. Thanks, Samantha. Sue, you had your hand up. You wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Thanks, Chris. This is awesome.
Oh,
I love hearing about the creative process. But I was wondering, do you ever like hear music or sounds when you're working on a card or pondering a story?
That's an interesting question. I guess my short answer is no. No. But it's more but I do feel certain things. Like it's more like it might be a sound, sure, like a harsh sound. Like for instance, it's almost more like something might feel harsh and rocky.
Yeah.
Or it might feel like it might smell kind of like the ocean, or there might be a somber, like foggy day quality about it. You know what I mean? So that
Yeah, I do.
I think in the area that you're speaking of, a sort of synesthesia, area, then I do feel that way, yes. But not music as such, no.
Right. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that's fascinating. I think that's a great question, Sue, and I think that's very interesting, Chris. Too, one of the things that that Letty has done in her tarot journaling class with us in the past is asked us to look at cards and enter the card and experience the five senses within the card. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about experiencing various senses as you're creating the cards.
Yeah, I do feel that crossover of sensation in other ways, in other at times, right? With when I'm doing music, specifically, then I get the reverse thing. So then it's like a color or combination of like a dark color and a kind of feeling like crinkling or yeah.
That totally makes sense. I love hearing about it.
Thanks for that question, Sue. I want to ask, I mean, we're running out of time, or we've sort of run out of time. If you guys don't mind, I get it if you have to jump off. But I wanted to ask you two other things. And if anybody else has any questions, please, raise your hand or jump in. In the book, you talk about how your approach to the deck is primarily through the lens of the Waite-Smith deck, with the exception of the Lovers and the Sun card, which you approach through the Marseille style deck. Can you talk a little bit about why you did that, and what it is that you see in the difference there of those decks? And we have like about 5 minutes left, so
we'll make it quick. Well, I think it's most significant in the Sun card, and it's also more. I have a particular sort of antipathy to the Rider-Waite Sun card. I mean, maybe that's, I'm overstating it a bit, but just for time's sake, I don't like it, and I find it goes somewhere I don't think. I guess I just don't want to go, but I find that the older tradition, or the Marseille tradition is more enigmatic and fruitful and informative, and for me, and so I always go that way with it. The Lovers card, is not that far away. It to me, on the Rider-Waite, it's a little grandiose and maybe overly romantic. I think there's more dynamic with the Marseille, which I find more interesting. Specifically with that other female character. So it becomes more. There's more going on than
more conflict, more choice.
Yeah, and that's right. There's more variable. It's more of a human psychological dynamic, and that can be seen from different angles. From the male point of view, or the female, what have you, depending on what you want to do with it. But yeah, I mean, I guess I have some similar qualms with. I mean, I think the Rider-Waite deck is great, and it's obviously a kind of Rosetta Stone. It's just a sort of base matter to work from, obviously, in a number of ways. But I do have some qualms with some of the cards. I feel like maybe Emma wasn't really. I sometimes think she wasn't really probably given proper instruction in many ways, and she was amazing what she came up with. But some of the cards seem a little too like each other, which I don't know is intentional, or maybe a little flat, or specifically with the, and that's just my opinion, obviously. But some of them I think go in a wrong direction, and that the Sun is what I would indicate.
I think that's interesting, and I have issues with the Lover card. I prefer the Marseille one as well. We've got to wrap things up, and just one last thought. We're entering the year of strength. Any thoughts?
Really?
Any last thoughts as we close up 2023?
For me,
How do you know we're? Oh, sorry. How do you know we're entering the year of strength? Was that just a card?
Is that what?
No, we're going from the year of the Chariot to the year of strength.
Is that just a card draw? How do you? I see the numbers.
Yeah.
Oh, the numbers. Okay.
That's number 8. Well, if you work with the Marseille system, it might be justice.
You're right.
True.
So and we're gonna see that very soon in our next tarot office hour, which I think is on January 4th. So I'm gonna sorry, I'm just interjecting.
No, yes, we're
letting-
wrapping it up.
letting-
Thank you, Letty.
You wrap it up. I'm so sorry. I have a little showcase of the Artomancy students right after in 15 minutes. So shifting gears to a different
No,
event.
it's all good. Thank you
It
so
was
much for hosting this for us and giving us the space to talk to Chris today.
Yeah, it was just fascinating. And Chris, your deck is so beautiful. It was actually super interesting to hear you talk about it and hear some of the process as well. As usual, James was incredible. It was also just really cool to see you work with a freshly published deck, which I think, is even, today I posted on Patreon something on tightrope walking, a spread that I created on tightrope walking. I think this is tightrope walking without without safety net when you're actually working with the tarot deck that the author is creating. It's a real performance on both sides. It was super great to have you both. Thank you to you too, and also thank you, Micheline, the secret angel, Saint Micheline, for secretly helping for that event to happen. So have a great rest of your evening. Chris, whenever you want to come back. You're always welcome here. James, I'll see you hopefully very soon. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.